Good afternoon. The subcommittee will come to order. I want to welcome all my colleagues to this hearing of the Subcommittee on the Middle East and South Asia. The purpose of this hearing is to follow up on the recent full committee hearing with Secretary of State and the USAID Administrator. Last week, we heard from administration officials on the Middle East component of the fiscal year 2013 budget, and this week we will focus on the South Asia component, which includes notably Afghanistan. Just over a year ago, this subcommittee heard testimony from the administration on our programming in Afghanistan, and although much has changed on the ground since then, our policy has not. Although the details continue to change, the fundamental underlying policy seems to remain the same, and it is driven by one key objective: transition by the end of 2014 by any means necessary. In the President's recent speech at Bagram Air Base, President Obama tried to lay out what he believes is the path forward. Reading that speech, however, it seems to me that it was more of a victory lap than a statement of strategy or objectives. Indeed, there is an inherent tension in President Obama's remarks. On the one hand, he makes very clear that our objective is to deny al-Qaeda a safe haven, nothing more. On the other hand, he acknowledges how tenuous the gains we have made are, and that if, as he says, we do not offer, quote, Afghanistan the opportunity to stabilize, our gains could be lost, and al-Qaeda could establish itself once more, unquote. While the much-celebrated, recently signed Strategic Partnership Agreement is certainly a move in the right direction, it is more of a broad commitment toward a similar future than a roadmap of how to get there. Clearly, in order to sustain these goals, we must, as President Obama notes, work to stabilize Afghanistan. But what does a stable Afghanistan entail? And as important, how do we and the Afghans plan to get there? We now have this agreement, but we have no specifics. We have the transition plan on the ground, but handing the keys over is hardly in and of itself a measure of success. How do our aid programs fit into an overall political strategy? We have a reconciliation process, but the process is stalled, and by all reasonable assessments, is going nowhere. As former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger recently noted, quote, if you negotiate while your forces are withdrawing, you're not in a great negotiating position, unquote. I hope our witnesses will explain today what kind of Afghanistan we want to see post-2014 and how the policies that are being implemented get us there. I will confess that my fear is that the administration has no real comprehensive plan, at least not on the civilian side. Before we start patting ourselves on the back too much over the Strategic Partnership Agreement, we should remember that shared intent is not shared policy. The devil, as they say, is in the details. Just to the south, in Pakistan, continued sanctuary offered to insurgents has been one of our largest challenges on the ground, and regrettably, I fear it will not disappear anytime soon. To that point, the Department of Defense's most recent report to Congress notes flatly that, quote, the Taliban insurgency and its al-Qaeda affiliates still operate with impunity from sanctuaries in Pakistan, unquote, which, quote, remain the most critical threat, unquote, to the U.S.-led effort in Afghanistan. At its core, Pakistani sanctuary is really a symptom of a larger problem. Our strategic objectives in Afghanistan are fundamentally incompatible with Pakistan's. While we seek a sovereign and independent Afghanistan, Islamabad vies for a neighbor that can be easily influenced and controlled. And as serious of a threat as Pakistani-based insurgent groups pose now, they have the potential to spiral post-2014 and place Afghanistan once more in the center of a dangerous regional conflict. I wish this were the only challenge in our bilateral relationship with Pakistan, but the 14-point guidelines approved by Pakistan's parliamentary review of the country's relationship with the U.S. ensures that more bumps are surely ahead, particularly as we approach transition in Afghanistan. I hope the administration is considering how our policy should adjust to accommodate a shift in our interest vis-a-vis Pakistan post-2014. To the southeast of Pakistan, things happily look significantly better. The U.S.-India relationship has come a long way in the past 20 years. The U.S. and India are united not only by shared interests, but by shared values, such as a belief in democracy. And as one of India's leading trade and investment partners, the United States strongly supports New Delhi's economic reforms and strongly encourages the Indian government to continue along this path. It's no secret, however, that to date, the U.S.-India civil nuclear agreement hasn't met U.S. commercial expectations due to the nuclear liability law passed by the Indian Parliament, which essentially shuts out U.S. companies. I hope our witnesses here today will discuss what actions are being taken to resolve this. And finally, I hope our witnesses will address the status of post-conflict reconciliation in Sri Lanka. I had the opportunity to travel to Sri Lanka recently, and I'm particularly interested in how Colombo is building on the recommendations of the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission. And I might note that the foreign minister or the Minister of External Affairs, as they refer to it, was here today, and a number of members of Congress, including myself, met with him and the delegation that they brought. We had a very good meeting, I thought. Unlike in some places, U.S. national security interests in South Asia are both dire and immediate. As we approach what will be a critical time of transition in the region, I hope the administration crafts its policy with a careful eye toward the future in order to sustain the gains that have been so hard-won. And at this time, I would like to yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from New York, distinguished gentleman from New York, my colleague and ranking member, Mr. Ackerman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just as we examined priorities in the Middle East last week, this week we're covering the other half of the subcommittee's jurisdiction, South Asia. Last week, I complimented the Obama administration for proposing, wisely in my view, a significant increase in American foreign assistance to the Middle East. This week, there will be no such compliments for the administration, which has requested more money for both Afghanistan and Pakistan, which are far and away the biggest aid recipients that we have in the region. Pakistan is like a black hole for American aid. Our tax dollars go in, our diplomats go in, sometimes. Our aid professionals go in, sometimes. Our hopes go in, our prayers go in. Nothing good ever comes out. Since FY 2002, we have sunk $24 billion in foreign assistance to Pakistan. It's hard to fathom how so much money can buy so little. Waste at this scale requires not only an oblivious body politic and Congress, but a large cadre of government professionals and a horde of contractors. Pakistan's government, civil military relations, and economy are not an iota less dysfunctional than they were 10 years ago, and in some respects are probably worse. Pakistan continues to pursue its national interests at our expense and that of our actual allies. Pakistan continues to shelter, directly support, and sponsor terrorists. Officially acknowledging this indisputable fact might be grossly impolitic, but that does not make it less true. American standing in the Pakistani public opinion is terrible, and it's getting worse. When polled last year, 3 out of every 4 Pakistanis regard the United States unfavorably, and more than half hold it to be a bad thing that Osama bin Laden sleeps with the fish. Does anyone think another 10 years and another $24 billion will turn things around? So apart from the need to secure the minimum cooperation necessary for us to continue to kill as many terrorists as we can identify, and to keep the supplies flowing to our American troops in Afghanistan, it's hard to imagine a less productive, more dysfunctional bilateral relationship anywhere in the world. Budget cutters, here is a fat and truly deserving target. And there is another, right next door in Afghanistan. If money and effort and hope simply disappear into the black hole of Pakistan, then Afghanistan is the equivalent of a theoretical wormhole. Money goes into Pakistan, and by miracle of metaphysics, or perhaps just electronic fund transfers, it emerges in bank accounts in the Gulf. A former advisor to General McChrystal once told me in Dubai there's a running joke that at the banks, anyone depositing less than $1 million in cash has to wait in line. It's a good one, but the joke is on us. We're the chumps who have poured more than $83 billion in foreign assistance down the world's biggest rat hole. And between the fall of the Taliban today, other than killing Osama bin Laden and nearly destroying al-Qaeda, we have scarcely a single significant, durable, nation-building achievement to claim, despite the extraordinary efforts that we've made in Afghanistan. What I really hope is behind the current plan for a transition to Afghanistan security responsibility in 2014 is a cold, dispassionate recognition that a country as ruined and dysfunctional as Afghanistan and that a government so thoroughly corrupt and ineffectual as Hamid Karzai's cannot be saved by our efforts. Instead of providing the requested $9.2 billion in military spending and foreign aid in FY 2013, we need to put this program on a glide path towards something much smaller and more sustainable. How small should it be? I'd suggest this rule of thumb. Our support should never total more than the government of Afghanistan spends on itself. Last year, that number was $3.3 billion. That would be a good start. American interests in South Asia are larger than Pakistan and Afghanistan, and I apologize for not giving in this allotted time the many other countries in the region, especially India, that merit attention. But unless we rebalance our policy and spending priorities in the region away from the expensive, failed sinkholes and toward building stronger partnership with the governments and nations that are seizing control of their own futures, we're going to lose much more than just money.
Thank you very much. At this time, members who would like to have 1 minute to make an opening statement can do so, and we'll yield a minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrabacher, who is the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee on Oversight and Investigations. Recognize.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me just note that I was a strong supporter of efforts that back after 9/11, I was a great big supporter of policies that have failed. And was I wrong for supporting them? I don't know. Maybe I was, maybe I wasn't. But those policies have failed, and we should recognize that. After we foisted a government upon the people of Afghanistan after 9/11 that is overly centralized, totally inconsistent with their traditions, and has become a captive of corrupt leaders like President Karzai, who has his own marching orders being given not by the Afghan people, but by the Pakistani government. In Pakistan, billions of aid has been given to the Pak since then, billions of aid, while they at the same time have terrorized their neighbors and repressed their own people. Those own people like the Baluchs, who are now fighting and struggling for their freedom there. We should cut Pakistan off of every cent because it's being used for evil purposes, and it's even been used to kill Americans. It's time we face reality, admit our mistakes, and cut our losses, and quit supporting failed policies and corrupt dictators.
Thank you. The gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from New York, Mr. Turner, is recognized for a minute if he'd like to make a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. I think I'll condense my remarks to Pakistan and Afghanistan. Pakistan is a difficult country with a long history of instability, military coups, and the harboring of jihadists and other violent enemies of the West and basic democratic values. In light of recent tensions between Pakistan and our government, I think we should carefully reevaluate the nature of what has been a fundamental foreign policy relationship and its benefit to us. The President has requested over $2.2 billion in assistance, a $100 million increase over last year. I, for one, am concerned about how this money is being spent by this government. Has been openly hostile to our interests and our values. Finally, everyone in this committee is familiar with the situation in Afghanistan. With the President having set a 2004 withdrawal date, there's growing concern among many in both Washington and across the country that the fragile institutions which we attempted to build in that country will quickly disintegrate. The President has asked for $928 million in total aid for Afghanistan. I would like to know what metric we will have to judge the success of our policies and our contributions. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. I'd like to introduce the panel here this afternoon. I'll begin with Ambassador Robert Blake, who is the Assistant Secretary for South and Central Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. As Assistant Secretary, he oversees U.S. foreign policy with India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, the Maldives, Bhutan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan. He previously served as Ambassador to Sri Lanka and the Maldives from 2006 to 2009, and as Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Mission in New Delhi, India from 2003 to 2006. Since he entered the Foreign Service in 1985, he has served at the American embassies in Tunisia, Algeria, Nigeria, and Egypt. And if I might, I'd also like to take a moment to thank you, Ambassador Blake, for the assistance you and your team have provided the subcommittee over time. Since becoming chairman, I've tried to visit as many of the countries in the South Asian region as I could and meet with the leaders there, as well as the Middle East. And you and your staff and our diplomats in the region have helped to make those visits very productive for myself, and I know other members as well. We've got some great folks on the South Asia desk and on the ground over there, and we appreciate all of your efforts, and I'd just like to publicly thank you for that. Next, I'd like to recognize Nisha Desai Biswal in USAID's, who is USAID's Assistant Administrator for Asia. Prior to her appointment, she served as the Majority Clerk for the State Department and Foreign Operations Subcommittee on the House Subcommittee on Appropriations. She also served on the professional staff of the House International Relations Committee, where she was responsible for South and Central Asia policy, as well as oversight of the State Department and USAID. Ms. Biswal has worked at USAID for 4 years and has served as Special Assistant to the Administrator and has worked in the Office of U.S. Foreign Disaster Assistance and the Office of Transition Initiative. We welcome you here this afternoon. And next, I'd like to introduce Daniel F. Feldman, who is one of 2 deputies to the Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan. He previously served as a partner in the International Corporate Social Responsibility Group at the law firm of Foley Hoag, LLP. He has also served as Director of Multilateral and Humanitarian Affairs at the National Security Council in the Clinton administration and is Counsel and Communications Advisor to the U.S. Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. He acted as Senior Foreign Policy and National Security Advisor to the Kerry presidential campaign in 2004. And we welcome you here this afternoon, Mr. Feldman. And last but not least, we have Alexander Thier, who is the Assistant to the Administrator for the Office of Afghanistan and Pakistan Affairs at the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. Prior to joining USAID, Thier served as Director for Afghanistan and Pakistan at the U.S. Institute of Peace and Chair of the Institute's Afghanistan and Pakistan Working Groups. Thier was also legal advisor to Afghanistan's constitutional and judicial reform commissions in Kabul and as UN and NGO official in Afghanistan and Pakistan during the country's civil war. And again, we have a very distinguished panel here this afternoon. We want to thank you for being willing to testify. And as you know, we have the 5-minute rule, and there's a lighting system. The yellow light will warn you that you have 1 minute to hopefully wrap up. And the red light comes on. We'd appreciate it if you'd cease at that point or very closely within that. I do have a gavel, but I'm sometimes relatively free with it. Not throwing it at people or anything, but free at it and maybe giving you a few extra seconds. So
doesn't want to say liberal.
No, I'm progressive on with the gavel. So in any event, without further ado, Ambassador Blake, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and first let me thank you for your very kind words about our great team in the field and our great team in Washington. We really appreciate that. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, it's a pleasure to be back here to discuss with you the priorities of my bureau, the South and Central Affairs Bureau. I have a longer written testimony that I'll submit for the record, and let me just briefly summarize what I have to say. First, let me start by talking about the SCA Bureau's highest priority, which is advancing regional economic integration, both within and between South and Central Asia. Both regions remain among the least integrated in the world, and the true economic development potential of the region, particularly of Afghanistan and Pakistan, will not be realized without greater connectivity to the fast-growing economies of South Asia. Last summer in Chennai, Secretary Clinton outlined her new Silk Road vision that foresees a network of economic and transit connections throughout South and Central Asia with Afghanistan at its heart. We're starting to see regional ownership and some momentum in this effort, and our budget request includes resources to facilitate this. We're also seeing other countries, such as Bangladesh, recognize the importance of tightening the linkage between South and Central Asia. The United States is extremely encouraged by the positive recent steps taken by the governments of India and Pakistan to normalize trade and commercial ties. This process of normalization in both directions could lead to at least a $10 billion increase in trade, not to mention expanded economic opportunity and stability for the wider region. In India, we continue to advance our strong partnership. Secretary Clinton just returned from a very positive and productive visit to New Delhi and Calcutta. We anticipate that bilateral goods and services trade will surge beyond $100 billion this year, which represents a quadrupling of trade since 2000. Meanwhile, our security relationship has hit an all-time high with an approximately $9 billion in U.S. defense sales to India and a continuing robust bilateral military exercise program. Let me also note continuing progress on civil nuclear cooperation. As you said, Mr. Chairman, there's more work to be done on both sides to create the level playing field necessary for U.S. companies to fully participate in India's civil nuclear market. In the interim, we continue to have constructive dialogue with the Indian government on these issues, and we're pleased that U.S. companies are finding ways to move forward now with commercial negotiations. Finally, India shares our goal of preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, and to that end has taken steps to reduce its imports of crude oil from Iran. In Bangladesh, Secretary Clinton announced on her trip the establishment of a partnership dialogue to maximize our bilateral cooperation on a wide range of issues that are important to us. We continue to voice our concerns to the government on issues like labor rights, Grameen Bank, and the importance of preserving and widening the space for civil society. We've also urged Bangladesh's leading political parties to work together for the good of the country, to agree on a formula for the next national elections scheduled for late 2013 or 2014. In the past year, Nepal has made remarkable strides towards concluding its peace process and resolving post-conflict issues. Today, all but 3,000 of the approximately 19,000 former combatants have departed the cantonments and have begun integrating into civilian life, and all of the former combatants' weapons have been turned over to the Nepalese army. With this progress in mind, the Department of State is currently undertaking a review of the Maoist status on 2 terrorist lists, and the Millennium Challenge Corporation has begun discussions with the government on a threshold program. In Sri Lanka, the government has resettled over 95% of those displaced during the final phase of its 26-year conflict, released many former LTTE combatants, and undertaken important infrastructure and other economic development projects. But there's much that remains to be done. The United States led successful efforts to win support for a UN Human Rights Council resolution in March that calls for Sri Lanka to implement its own Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Committee report, take action on accountability, and allow UN special rapporteurs to visit Sri Lanka, report on their findings, and offer relevant technical assistance. Mr. Chairman, Secretary Clinton will see Foreign Minister Perez on Friday to discuss further all of these matters. Mr. Chairman, in conclusion, South Asia's strategic importance in the region and world affairs will only continue to grow. And it's my pleasure now to turn this over to my good friend and colleague, Nisha Biswal, to discuss the vital role that USAID is playing to support our foreign policy priorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. You were right to the second on that. That's very impressive, very impressive. And Ms. Bisbal, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
That's why he's at the State Department, sir. Chairman Chabot, Ranking Member Ackerman, members of the committee, thank you again for the invitation to testify today. I will summarize briefly my opening statement and ask that my full statement be submitted for the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
This afternoon, I wanted to share with you my perspective on the vital role that U.S. foreign assistance programs are playing in this important, dynamic, and increasingly democratic region, and in support of the foreign policy priorities that Ambassador Blake outlined. The diverse but densely populated subcontinent is home to nearly 1/4 of the world's population, and we're confronting daunting challenges of disease, deprivation, natural disasters, and environmental degradation. Yet this is also a region that has shown significant progress and one that holds even greater promise for the future. And the American people can take a degree of pride in the role that our partnership and our assistance has played in this progress, such as the recent success in India on polio eradication. As Assistant Secretary Blake noted, our investments in the region have also yielded significant benefits for the American people. In fact, U.S. exports to developing countries overall have grown 6 times faster than exports to developed economies. And today they represent roughly half of all goods and services that the United States sells abroad. We know that the markets of the future will be in these expanding economies of South and East Asia, and USAID is committed to helping develop these further. Finally, under the leadership of Dr. Rajiv Shah, USAID is reforming the way that we do business by broadening our partner base, making it easier for small businesses, local institutions, and donors to partner with us. We're making better use of science and technology, strengthening our evaluation capability, and partnering much more effectively with the private sector to leverage the knowledge, the expertise, and the resources of the American businesses to solve critical global challenges. The President's fiscal year 2013 budget requests $362.3 million for USAID programs in South Asia. The majority of aid assistance in South Asia is concentrated on the 2 poorest countries, Bangladesh and Nepal. About 69% of our assistance goes to these 2 countries. Nearly 40% of all Bangladeshis today still live on less than $1 a day, and malnutrition rates in this country continue at an alarming rate of about 41% for children under 5. So in Bangladesh, we're addressing food insecurity and malnutrition through our Feed the Future program, improving health outcomes through a focus on infectious diseases, family planning, maternal and child health, and addressing the impact of weather-related disasters. Similarly, Nepal faces development challenges and simultaneously is emerging from a 13-year conflict. AID is strengthening that fragile transition to peace by supporting the integration and rehabilitation of thousands of former combatants into civilian life. We're also working with civil society and the government to improve the delivery of essential social services, scale up health interventions, and address food insecurity and build disaster resilience. In Sri Lanka, USAID has focused on the war-affected populations in northern and eastern parts of the country to support reconciliation between the ethnic groups and to increase economic opportunities for the victims of conflict. In the Maldives, we are supporting efforts to enhance climate resilience and water security in this incredibly vulnerable island nation. And finally, in India, the United States has embarked on a strategic partnership with the government to harness the capabilities of both countries to address poverty and hunger not only in India, but around the world. As India steps up its own engagement and assistance programs globally, it provides a powerful example of democratic governance and economic growth. The new partnership between the United States and India brings together U.S. and Indian resources and partners with U.S. and Indian businesses to identify and invest in innovative and cost-effective solutions that can have a transformative impact not only in India, but can also be adapted for addressing global challenges. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I just want to reiterate my commitment to ensuring that our assistance programs are advancing vital U.S. interests in the region, are being implemented in the most effective and efficient manner possible. USAID's programs are a smart investment in our own prosperity and security. I appreciate the opportunity to share AID's programs in South Asia and welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. And you also were you nailed it as well, right, on second.
I was 2 seconds off.
Yeah, this is very impressive. They've set a big, important and high
Bar's
standard.
high.
The bar is very high, it is. Now, you might have heard the bells there, which has indicated that we do have votes on the floor. We have time to get in one, so we'll take your testimony, and then we'll come back and take Mr. Thayer and our questions then after that. We would be gone ballpark about a half hour or so because we have 4 votes. So, Mr. Feldman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to discuss our FY13 request for Afghanistan and Pakistan. And I, too, have submitted a more detailed written statement, which I would like to ask to be submitted for the record.
That objection so ordered.
Thank you. While the situation on the ground in both Afghanistan and Pakistan has been quite fluid over the past year, with some significant progress and also remaining challenges, a constant in our approach is the sober responsibility we take as stewards of the taxpayers' funds. We have sought to carefully evaluate our efforts with our interagency partners and request for FY13 only the core resources needed to accomplish and sustain our mission successfully in this upcoming very critical and transitional year. In Afghanistan, the administration has implemented 3 mutually reinforcing surges, military, civilian, and diplomatic, to fulfill the national security imperative of ensuring that Afghanistan never again serves as a safe haven for al-Qaeda. We are committed to learning the lessons of history and avoiding the kind of precipitous pullout that can fuel instability. We are now in the execution phase of the strategic trajectory that the administration outlined for you. We expect some continuing challenges along the way, but we are doing what we said we would. We're achieving the goals we set in each of these 3 surges: fighting, talking, and building at once. Just 2 weeks ago, as you noted, Mr. Chairman, a strategic partnership agreement was signed that provides a comprehensive framework for continued cooperation between the United States and a sovereign Afghanistan. President Karzai just announced this past weekend the 3rd tranche of transition, after which nearly 75% of Afghans will be living in areas where Afghan forces are leading. The Afghan army and police have now repeatedly demonstrated their enhanced capacity to defend the Afghan people with minimal assistance from coalition forces. And by the end of 2014, the Afghans will be fully responsible for security throughout the country. In Chicago this weekend, our allies and partners will join us in advancing a sustainable, effective Afghan security force beyond transition. Key to achieving our security objectives is improved Afghan civilian capacity and economic opportunity, which requires not only sustained support from the international community, but also, critically, Afghan action to improve governance, fight corruption, promote private sector investment, and protect human rights. In July, the international community and the Afghan government will meet in Tokyo to advance this mutual accountability, building on commitments already made in a series of international conferences, including in Istanbul and Bonn over the past year. While we will continue to face real challenges, we have seen some remarkable results. We have made significant progress in bolstering women's rights and education, expanding health services to the Afghan people, advancing nascent democracy, and improving Afghan capacity. We similarly have a clear national security interest in Pakistan's stability. With a population of 190 million people and the 2nd largest Muslim-majority country in the world, but with pockets of extremism and nuclear capability in a tough neighborhood, Pakistan is of critical importance to regional stability and to our regional strategy. We share many common interests with Pakistan, including fighting the extremists that plague us both, the benefits of a secure and stable Afghanistan, and developing stronger regional trade ties. I want to be clear-eyed in acknowledging that the events of the past year have posed significant challenges to our bilateral relationship. But the U.S. and Pakistan have both expressed and demonstrated a real commitment to getting this relationship on firmer footing and working together constructively on military, intelligence, and economic cooperation. I've been witness to this personally on my 2 visits to Pakistan in the last month alone, both as part of senior interagency delegations to work diligently through these issues. A critical step must be Pakistan's contribution to the U.S. and international efforts in Afghanistan through the reopening of the ground lines of communication. A U.S. team has been in place in Islamabad for the past 3 weeks since my last trip there to address these issues, meeting around the clock, including this evening. We are making progress and hope we can come to resolution soon. We welcome NATO's invitation to Pakistan to participate at this weekend's summit in Chicago. Pakistan's cooperation on our key counterterrorism priorities is vital. As President Obama said following the death of Osama bin Laden, we've been able to kill more terrorists on Pakistani soil than just about any place else. We could not have done that without Pakistani cooperation. We continue to work with Pakistan to restrict the capability of extremist groups that pose a serious threat to Americans, Afghans, and ISAF forces, and to the Pakistani people. In their recent parliamentary review, the Pakistanis themselves mandated that their territory shall not be used for any kind of attacks on other countries and that all foreign fighters shall be expelled from Pakistani soil. In this broader national security context, U.S. assistance to Pakistan is designed to promote stability and growth in civilian institutions and the private sector. Though still fragile, Pakistan's civilian institutions have strengthened over the past year and shown great resilience, and the country is now preparing for elections which could bring the first handover of one civilian government to another in the nation's history. Our assistance is also designed to evolve the bilateral economic relationship to one based on trade, not just aid, so that we can begin the trajectory away from long-term civilian assistance. In both Afghanistan and Pakistan, we recognize that our objectives cannot be met without regional support and greater regional trade and economic integration. We applaud unprecedented steps to improve Indian-Pakistani trade and commerce, and which will continue to advance the Secretary's new Silk Road vision. And in conclusion, in FY13 and looking ahead in FY14, are both critical milestones in our engagement. We look forward to continuing to work closely with Congress to ensure that our efforts are appropriately resourced to achieve our objectives.
Thank you very much. And at this time, we will be in recess for a half hour, and then we'll have Mr. Thier and then question the panel. So we'll be gone for approximately a half hour, and we are in recess.
20 seconds. Over. I know. What is that? I definitely think the question.
don't think we do, just have to have two. We started, yeah. The committee will come back to order. We have to have two members here at least in order to carry on business, and we now have two members. So, Mr. Theer, you're recognized for 5 minutes. You might want to hit that mic there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and other distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the invitation to appear today. My statement is also longer, and I ask that it be entered
Without
into the
objection,
record.
so ordered.
Our civilian assistance to Afghanistan and Pakistan is a critical component of our core U.S. national security objectives in South and Central Asia. Afghanistan and Pakistan, and consequently the region as a whole, present enormous opportunities and enormous challenges. I began working in the region 20 years ago when I served in Afghanistan and Pakistan for nearly 4 years during the Afghan Civil War. This region, racked with conflict for much of the last 3 decades, remains one of the least integrated in the world, with a vast majority of its human and economic potential untapped. This does not have to be the case. However, it will take fundamental changes by regional leaders to transform these dynamics. Our U.S. civilian assistance programs can be an essential catalyst and incentive for change, and our efforts in Afghanistan and Pakistan today are delivering tangible, measurable results. Our efforts to spur investment in small Afghan enterprises, expand trade ties between Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, and connect the restive tribal areas of Pakistan to the economy and government are creating economic opportunity, interdependence, better governance, and increased accountability. The importance and impact of effective, accountable, and sustainable development assistance to Afghanistan and Pakistan is more essential than ever in this period of transition. The stability of Afghanistan amidst the drawdown of our forces will require sustained effort to cement the important development gains that have been made and mitigate the economic consequences of the reduction of our military presence. We have seen the dire consequences of neglect and disengagement play out in this region before, and the Obama administration is committed not to repeat history. Afghanistan has, in fact, made remarkable development progress in the last decade with the support of U.S. and other donor investments. None of these significant achievements was foreordained. For example, the Afghan public health story is nothing short of remarkable. It is an appropriate reminder this week of Mother's Day that Afghanistan had the worst maternal mortality rate in the world in 2002, and only 6% of Afghans had access to even the most basic health care. Today, thanks to an innovative partnership with the Afghan Ministry of Public Health, access to basic health services has expanded to over 60%, and life expectancy has risen 15 to 20 years, the single largest gain in life expectancy anywhere in the world in the last decade. Improvements in education and economic growth tell a similar story. But we have also learned the hard lessons in what is one of the most challenging environments in the world, and we have made critical corrections to the implementation of assistance to enhance effectiveness, accountability, and sustainability. The path to sustainable stability in Afghanistan requires continued commitment to civilian assistance, increasingly through efforts that will boost Afghan self-sufficiency. We have prioritized our assistance portfolio to make foundational investments that will enable transition, ensuring that Afghans have the skills and resources necessary to chart their own future. However, this commitment is contingent on the Afghans fulfilling their commitment to strengthen accountability, transparency, oversight, and the effectiveness of government institutions. Pakistan also remains a critical partner for the United States. Their efforts to deal with rising militancy, transnational terrorism, and nuclear security are of paramount importance to U.S. national security, and Pakistan's economic and political stability is essential to achieving those objectives. Despite the enormous challenges to the bilateral relationship over the last 16 months, U.S. development work in Pakistan has persevered and delivered important outcomes for the United States and for Pakistan. USAID has crafted a results-driven civilian assistance strategy that is having a visible and measurable impact that furthers our objectives there. Over the past 18 months, we have refocused our program in 5 key sectors: energy, economic growth, stabilization, education, and health, and I hope I'll have more opportunity to talk about those. We have also created a network of public-private partnerships that will make those gains sustainable. In conclusion, development assistance is an important tool in advancing key U.S. national interests, forging strong and productive relationships with international partners, and helping Afghanistan and Pakistan on a path to where our assistance will no longer be required. Ultimately, our investments in a stable, self-reliant Afghanistan and Pakistan provide security, economic, and opportunity, and basic services to their citizens will enhance U.S. security and the long-term stability of the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thier. Your time's expired. We'll now have 5 minutes to ask questions. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for that purpose, and I'll begin on Afghanistan. And Mr. Ambassador, any of the questions I have, anybody's free to respond if you'd like to. But the 6-month assessment team concluded that the Afghan Public Protection Force, the APPF, was not on track to assume private security contract responsibilities by March 20th, 2012, and made 6 urgent recommendations with regard to improving the APPF readiness standards. Have any of these recommendations been implemented, and how many of the transition readiness standards have been met by the APPF as of this quarter? Whoever might want to. Mr. Thier?
Thank you. I can speak for the USAID portion of that transition. The date of transition was on March 20th of this year, and our implementing partners had identified that 34 of our programs in Afghanistan would require the services of the Afghan Public Protection Force. Today, 28 of those 34 have signed contracts with the APPF. The APPF is at their program sites and is functioning. The remaining 6 of those projects are still negotiating the terms of the agreement under an extension that was granted to them to do so. So in specific response, while I do not have an update assessment that directly tracks the one from last September, what I can tell you is that for the vast majority of our projects that required the APPF, the challenge has been met of contracting with the APPF. The guards are now on site and performing the function to the satisfaction of our implementing partners.
Okay, thank you. My next question has to do with aid to Pakistan. As I mentioned in my opening statement, one of my main concerns regarding our current policy in Afghanistan is a general lack of long-term strategy. I have that same concern regarding our policy towards Pakistan. Foreign assistance is a means, not an end in and of itself. From looking through the fiscal year 13 budget proposal, however, it appears to me that our assistance is not aimed at any larger objective. They're just a series of disparate programs. Could one of you explain to me exactly what we're trying to achieve in Pakistan, in particular with our aid? Whoever would like to take that. Mr. Feldman?
Sure, I'll start on that. Alex and I can split it. We've thought very long and hard about our civilian assistance to Pakistan. Our request is split almost exactly evenly between civilian assistance and security assistance. That was done purposely so that there would be some equality between those amounts. On the civilian assistance side in particular, what we have continued to say is that we are trying to support a long-term, stable, civilian, democratic, pluralistic, tolerant society. And we have prioritized our assistance into the 5 key areas that Alex noted. Those are all, particularly those top priorities of energy, economic growth, and stabilization along the border areas to help to build economic stability, build a middle class, and ultimately transition us away from assistance to a more trade-based economy. And so on something like energy, it's impossible to create the type of middle class that can provide for the economic stability when we're still dealing with 16, 18-hour brownouts. And so our efforts to get megawatts on the grid, to build, to have economic growth programs in both urban and rural areas, and then very tangible projects such as road work in the border areas, which help us both on the security and stability side as well as the economic stability side, are key to those goals.
Okay. All right, let me, I've got only a minute left, so let me say, one thing just I would like to say is I heartily support the idea of moving to more trade and less aid. I think that's a goal. We don't always make it, but we certainly ought to attempt to do that. And finally, my question is about the impact of U.S. withdrawal on India. Indian decision makers have become discomfited by signs that the United States and its allies are preparing to leave Afghanistan in such a way that would provide a central role for Pakistan in mediating between Kabul and Taliban elements, perhaps even to include a role for the latter, Pakistan or Taliban in Afghanistan's governance. Such an outcome stokes fears in Indian leaders who wish to limit Islamabad's influence in a post-war Afghanistan. To what extent are such Indian fears legitimate? And to what extent, if any, does an Indian role in Afghanistan represent a legitimate threat to Pakistan's security interests? Whoever would like to take that. Mr. Ambassador?
Let me just start on that, and then maybe Dan can chime in. Mr. Chairman, when Secretary Clinton was in India last week, she talked a lot with the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister about what we're doing in Afghanistan, and particularly briefed them on our own strategic partnership agreement. I think the Indians were very reassured by that and reassured by the long-term commitment that we're demonstrating to Afghanistan. And indeed, the Indians themselves are doing a lot to show their own long-term commitment. They have a $2 billion assistance program. They have recently invested in a very large iron ore project that's a multi-billion-dollar project at Hajigak, where they'll not only be investing in that, but also the associated infrastructure. And then we really see India as kind of the linchpin of the New Silk Road vision, because they're going to be the largest market in the region. So they're really so important to developing a lot of these regional projects like the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India gas pipeline, and many, many other things like that. And of course, they've been making a lot of progress with Pakistan on the bilateral trade side, which is very, very important to this vision that you talked about of trade. Okay. If we're going to create a trade-based economy in Afghanistan, a very important part of that will be to open up those trade routes to India.
Okay. Thank you very much. And my time's expired. I'll yield to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd ask first, unanimous consent that my full statement be entered into the record. I thank the chair. Ambassador Blake, I think this may be a question for you, but it may be for Mr. Feldman. The United States and Pakistan seem to have been on different paths when it comes to the Haqqani network. Can you comment on where we are in our discussions with the Pakistani government with respect to this very troubling issue?
We have had, as I noted in my opening statement, core among the shared interests that the U.S. and Pakistan have is our commitment to fighting extremism. And it has taken many forms, and I noted the President's statement, which is in my written statement, as well as some specific examples of continued coordination on the counterterrorism side over the last year. On the Haqqani network in particular, I can echo the Secretary Clinton's own comments when she was there in last in October, when she talked about how terrorism is a mutual threat to all of us. And at that point, she noted the efforts to squeeze the Haqqani network, both from the Afghan side of the border, which was going on with military operations, as well as from the Pakistani side. And we've listed some specific steps that have ongoing intelligence channel conversations with the Pakistanis about on continued ways to do that, including on ensuring
but
that
Mr.
there's
Feldman,
no intel sharing, on
but Mr.
financial
Feldman, just a
resources.
second. There is convincing evidence that elements of the Pakistani government have protected the Haqqani network within the borders of Pakistan. What are we doing to change that?
Yes, and sir, we are working jointly with the Pakistanis on targeting Haqqani very, very explicitly. We've targeted them through listings, specifically individually. We continue to work with the Pakistanis on ways that we can confront this, not only through military efforts, but through a range of efforts that the civilian government, the intelligence channels, and others can take. This is a core part of our conversation.
Mr. Feldman, is it your testimony to this subcommittee that the Pakistani government and all of its elements, including the ISI, are in full cooperation with the United States in trying to suppress the Haqqani network as a terrorist organization?
We continue to work with the Pakistanis very closely on all extremist threats posed to both the U.S. and Pakistan.
That is not my question, Mr.
Including
Feldman.
the Haqqani network.
My question is, do we have the full cooperation of the Pakistani government in this matter?
We are.
It's not a complicated question.
And I would say we are coordinating very closely with the Pakistani government.
And I would say you just didn't answer the question, Mr. Feldman.
Sir, our counterintelligence efforts are core to our shared interests here, and the Haqqani network is chief amongst them. And we continue to, there are key Haqqani targets who have been killed in Pakistan over the last year, both through our own and shared efforts, and there are a range of other alternatives that we are taking to try to continue to target them.
Well, I think in this Congress on a bipartisan basis, there is very troubling evidence of the lack of cooperation with the Pakistani government on this matter, and the Haqqani network is a very dangerous, potent network that has been listed as terrorist. And if we're going to have a partnership or a collaboration with the Pakistani government, that's the least we can expect of them. And the idea that they actually harbor the Haqqani in Pakistan is extremely troubling, Mr. Feldman. The fact that we make representations to the Pakistani government is not sufficient. Ambassador Blake, we just saw an assassination of somebody who was sort of playing interlocutor with the Taliban, with the idea toward enticing some elements of the Taliban to negotiate with the United States government and with the government of Afghanistan. That seems not to bode well for any prospect of negotiating with such an extremist Islamic element like the Taliban. Would you comment?
I'm handling all India and all the countries around.
Mr. Blake, we can't hear you. I'm sorry, Mr. Ambassador, we can't hear you.
Let me defer to Dan again on that one.
You're back, Mr. Feldman.
I'm here to talk.
You're going to tell me again with marbles in your mouth we're cooperating very closely.
Sir, I think as Chairman Mullen noted when he testified last fall, there's no solution in the region without Pakistan, and there's no stability in the region without Pakistan. And core among our chief interests, which are continuing to work and to evolve, and where we have a very robust ongoing relationship through intelligence channels, through military channels, and through civilian channels. This is a chief amongst our commands. We talk to the Pakistanis constantly about the need to continue to target even more robustly Haqqani network.
Okay, so you were putting closure on the previous question. I just asked a question about the Taliban.
Yes.
Gentleman's time's expired, but the gentleman is yielded an additional minute.
I'm sorry. On the assassination, on the most recent assassination, we don't have any specific intelligence on where that originated from. Obviously, the reconciliation efforts in Afghanistan are part of our core interests. There's one of the diplomatic surges, one of the three surges. The High Peace Council is key among those, and there are those who seek to undermine the reconciliation process, who are targeting specific members of the High Peace Council. But we don't have any intelligence at this point in terms of who ordered that.
But, Mr. Chairman, if you'd indulge just one follow-up. My question really wasn't so much what intelligence we have as asking you to react to the idea that it calls into question, if you will, the efficacy of trying to engage the Taliban in reconciliation at all. And in a tragic way, this assassination perhaps puts the exclamation point on that. You may not share that view, and I'm inviting you to tell us whether you do or don't,
Yeah.
or
Sir, I would say that we have long said through both military and civilian leadership that this conflict would not end through military means alone. It has to end, as most insurgencies end, through some sort of political resolution and reconciliation. That is why we are continuing to try to pursue all possible channels on reconciliation in conjunction with continuing our military and civilian efforts as well. I think this assassination indicates that there's actually great divisions within the Taliban, and that there may well be some who are seeking to reconcile and others that are not. And in as far as it may be a signal of conflict and chaos within the Taliban, that's not a bad thing for our interests.
and to your point, and the U.S. government's position is there are some elements worth trying to reconcile with.
The gentleman's time has expired. Did you want to respond to that quickly?
Yes, sir. That is part of what our fundamental strategy, that we would have these three surges simultaneously, military, civilian, and diplomatic, and reconciliation is the core piece of that diplomatic strategy.
I thank the chair.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In following up with my good friend from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, Chairman Mullen himself stated that the Haqqani network is operating with Pakistan's support. Secretary Clinton warned the president of Pakistan about this. Recently, I was in Pakistan last November. We talked to President Zardari about this, but in his terms, he said, we don't pick and choose between terrorist organizations, we go after them all. So I see a bit of a conflict. And of course, we get briefed on this. They say, well, they have the terrorists that are in the good bin and those in the bad bin. And so where does the truth lie? I guess, Mr. Feldman, you're the man of the hour.
I am the man of the hour. Sir, as Chairman Mullen said, and as I was attempting to try to say before, he expressed the administration's view that continuing safe havens are extremely troubling and we have to see action taken against them. But he also emphasized in the exact same testimony that we need to continue to stay engaged to be able to do that. And he cautioned against signs of disengaging with Pakistan.
Well, and then also the report came out that Haqqani was behind the Afghan attacks against the U.S. envoy just in April of this year.
Yes.
They're killing our soldiers, and the idea that the Pakistanis could be complicit in working with them, which I personally believe is true, is very troubling to policymakers like ourselves, and particularly when it comes to foreign aid. Could the Secretary certify today that the Pakistani government is in no way working with the Haqqani network?
Well, that's one of the certifications that we're working through right now on a staff level, and we don't have an answer for you at this point. But we are taking that certification, which I know you've been quite involved with, very, very seriously, and trying to look at it as soberly as possible. Look, we need to be in a position where, in every engagement with the Pakistanis, we can continue to show the need for increased cooperation on extremists, including among the Haqqani network, which pose a threat to both of us. And there's clearly more that could be done, but the way that we continue to try to get this done is through increased engagement. And as Secretary Clinton said when she was there last, it's through issues like the financing networks, on intelligence sharing, on working with law enforcement personnel to deny safe haven, and we raise this at every opportunity, at every level in all of our engagement.
And I totally agree with the engagement issue. I just think, again, when it comes to being able to certify whether or not Pakistan, ISI, or government at any level is working with Haqqani, it sounds like this is a work in progress within the administration in terms of whether or not they can certify that question.
It's indeed a work in progress, but I can tell you very honestly, it's still happening at the staff level where we're collecting all the data and looking at the range of criteria.
Are you aware of any evidence that they are cooperating and working together?
There's a range of evidence, and depending on the certification for the steps that they have taken, countering extremism and terrorism, including on Taliban, including on Quetta Shura, and less on the Haqqani network, but continued efforts to try to encourage joint.
Well, I would encourage to continue that pressure. I know the Secretary is very good at that. She's smart. I know she's putting that pressure on. I want to echo the chair's comments about trade. When we met with President Zardari, and I just want to pass this along, he said, I really, what I want is more trade, not aid. Yes. And we had dinner with some Pakistani businessmen who are working with the Indians, and there are actually now some pretty closer business ties between Pakistan and India, which I think long-term it will resolve a lot of this tension between the two countries that has caused so many problems for us here as well. Last question I want to ask Ms. Biswal. In Herat, there's been kind of an experiment going on with 5 different things: healthcare, water, food, and jobs and training, job training, and education, to kind of have a more holistic approach to our aid to that area in Afghanistan. USAID, there have been a lot of problems with the way it's I think, functioned in Afghanistan. This has been a sort of joint project with USAID and the NGOs. And I would ask that you look at what's going on in Herat as a potential model for the rest of the country. I don't know if you're familiar with what's going on there or not, or if you can comment on that.
I would defer to my colleague, Alex Thayer, on that.
Mr. Tier?
Yeah, hi, thank you. I'm not obviously certain which project you're referring to. I have been to Herat recently, and if you've been, Herat is the place in Afghanistan when you visit, you think if the rest of the country could look like this in a decade, we'd be doing well.
Right.
So I fully endorse the notion that there have been some very successful programs there, and I want to link it to this broader issue, which is that Herat is a trading city. It has always been a trading city, and its strength is drawn from the fact that they have very successfully in the last 10 years rebuilt trade relations going in every direction, which I think is contributing to the prosperity of the city. And one of the things that we're really trying to do in Afghanistan, in that part as well as other parts, is to really provide these tools of self-sufficiency so that more Afghans are building their own sustainable livelihoods rather than depending on.
I would ask that you look at that model and see what they're doing there, because it's working. Even the Taliban some Taliban members have come back to the village saying, we want to join you because we don't like our life. They're doing it just for $5 a day, a lot of these guys, and they don't want to be with the Taliban. No, the top leaders, they are who they are. But I think we could win back a lot of the Afghan people through that kind of model. I know my time's expired.
Yes, the gentleman's time's expired. We'll go to a second round now, and I recognize myself for 5 minutes. I'd like to shift a little bit here to Sino-Indian relations. The simultaneous rise of the two world's most populous countries has elicited anxieties in both New Delhi and Beijing. The dynamics of the triangular U.S., India, China relationships are likely to be critical to fostering global stability and prosperity in the 21st century. How do you see these things progressing in coming years? And additionally, anti-Indian rhetoric has become more common in China's state-run media. Some hawkish Indian analysts assert that China's newly muscular stance towards India is a direct result of the U.S.-India strategic partnership. To what extent, if any, do you agree with that particular assessment? Whoever would like to take it on. Mr. Ambassador?
Mr. Chairman, let me just say, first of all, that both the United States and China have continuously stressed that our expanded strategic engagement is not coming at the expense of China, and that neither one of us are seeking to contain China. On the contrary, both of us are seeking to engage China wherever possible. In my own case, I have very productive dialogues with my Chinese counterparts, both on South Asia and on Central Asia, to try to encourage more cooperative efforts between us and at least understand what each of us are trying to get accomplished in each of these important regions for us. And I must say that the quality of those dialogues has really improved over the last several years. I think another kind of important factor to note is that Sino-Indian trade has grown very, very fast. So that has given both of those countries an enormous stake in each other's success, and I think has helped to give them an incentive to work through some of the very tough border and other issues that they have. So I think both of our countries are going to continue to try to engage China, to be clear when we have differences, but also to look for opportunities where we can work together. We've actually proposed a trilateral U.S.-China India dialogue, and I think that the Chinese are seriously considering that now. We hope that they will agree to that. And one of the most interesting early topics for discussion would be Afghanistan, because we believe there are ways that we could work together in that country.
Thank you. Staying on India, but a related issue, the relations between the U.S. and India have been somewhat strained due to India's continued import of Iranian oil. This dynamic was the focus of Secretary Clinton's recent trip to India, where she said, quote, "We're encouraged by what we've seen the Indian government being able to do. We want to keep the pressure on Iran," unquote. India said on Tuesday that it would cut purchases of Iranian oil by 11%, and we had a meeting with the Indian foreign minister a while back, and I think in a bipartisan manner we all emphasized how important this was to us. And so my question is this move big enough to avert U.S. sanctions, and how will this move affect U.S.-Indian relations? Mr. Ambassador?
Thank you for that important question, Mr. Chairman. As you say, when Secretary Clinton was in India last week, she welcomed the progress that India is making, and she noted that the United States and India both share the same goal, which is to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. So India has been really terrific in their support in 4 different votes in the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, on this subject. Prime Minister Singh has said publicly many times that it is not in India's interest to have another nuclear weapons state in the region. So I think we're in pretty good convergence on this. We continue to urge India to make progress in continuing to reduce its imports of oil from Iran, as we do with all of our other partners. And as the Secretary said, there's progress, but we need to see continued progress from them and other countries.
And then finally, in the short time that I have left there, it's no secret that to date, and I had mentioned this in my opening statement, that the U.S.-India civil nuclear agreement hasn't met U.S. commercial expectations, and a key impediment has been the nuclear liability law passed by the Indian Parliament, which essentially, as I mentioned, shut down U.S. companies being involved there. I understand that the department has been in some discussions with the Indians about the implementation of this law. What is the current status of that liability law?
Well, again, Secretary Clinton discussed this on her visit last week with senior Indian leaders. She noted that we continue to have a very strong interest in supporting our company's interests in moving ahead, particularly Westinghouse and General Electric. She was pleased to hear from India that they have restated their commitment to ensuring a level playing field for our companies. We've had a very strong dialogue on the liability legislation. That dialogue has relieved some of our concerns, but not all of our concerns. And I think our companies still feel that there are impediments to moving ahead with the current law, so we'll continue to work through that. But in the meantime, we're focusing on trying to support our company's efforts to sign early commercial agreements, things that do not require or are not impeded in any way by the existing liability legislation, things like early engineering and other contracts that would be the kind of precursors to a wider reactor contract. So there has been progress on that, and we hope that we can see some early conclusions of some of those contracts that would be quite important to our companies.
Okay, thank you. My time's expired. The gentleman from Virginia is once again recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. Mr. Ambassador, following up on the chairman's question about India's cooperation in our sanctions and other policies with respect to Iran, when we had a dinner with the new Indian ambassador here in Washington, and she made the point that India is heavily reliant on Iran as a source of oil. I want to say 15, 20%, something in that range. I assume that was the subject of ongoing discussions between the Secretary and Indian leadership when she was there. what is the sense of progress we're making in helping the Indians to lessen their reliance on Iran as a source of fuel?
As the Secretary said, and as I said earlier, Mr. Connolly, I think progress is being made. To be clear, India is making this progress not because of our own bilateral urgings, but I think they're making progress because they say that this is because of financial and commercial considerations. Most of the Indian companies that have been working in Iran are pulling out for their own reasons. Again, looking at market considerations. That's certainly a welcome development from our perspective. So we've had a good dialogue on this, and again, we welcome the progress, and that percentage is steadily going down, even as India's energy
Consumption,
needs are growing quite substantially.
One can't be unsympathetic with the Indian plight. It's not that easy to radically alter, especially in a big country like India, as you say, with growing consumption, growing demand, to easily just change your supply pattern. Are we assisting the Indian government in identifying alternative suppliers?
We are, and we're really assisting all of our friends that are trying in this same predicament. In the Indian case, they've actually had a long-term policy to source more from Saudi Arabia that's been going on for several years. So you'll see the percentage from Saudi Arabia has been growing rapidly. A more recent important source for them is Iraq, which itself has been increasing its own production, and so that also has become quite an important source for India.
Maybe the Keystone Pipeline will help India with its energy independence, too. I'm surprised that claim hasn't been made. Ms. Biswal, when I was in Afghanistan, AID was ramping up big time several years ago, and so was DEA. Recent report about poppy production seems to suggest that actually we've lost ground in that respect. 17 out of 34 provinces now poppy producers, 3 of which had been previously declared as poppy-free. That sounds like all of the aid we're providing through your agency and through DEA does not seem to have had the desired effect. Your comment?
I'm going to, again, defer to my colleagues Alex Steer and Dan Feldman on this.
Yeah, Mr. Connolly, we'd be happy to get back to you with a briefing specifically on counter-narcotics. There have been reports on several of the districts that have gone from poppy-free to some production, but that production is still relatively minimal, and I'm not sure whether the overall trends agree with your supposition that the overall amount is down. What we can talk about is what USAID and other of our civilian assistance is doing in agricultural production to create livelihoods and to create more economic stability in the country, specifically focused on poppy-producing regions. I don't know if you want to say anything more on that.
So there's obviously 2 components to this program. The State Department INL works mostly on the eradication and prosecution and so on side of the narcotics control element, and USAID focuses on what we call alternative livelihoods, creating a way for farmers who are in the poppy to get out of it and to get out of it sustainably. We have seen really pretty dramatic in the last couple of years increases in crop yields in Afghanistan, and specifically in some of those areas that are targeted to try and replace poppy cultivation with cultivation of wheat and horticulture. So that's improving. What we're really now working on is trying to get them better market access, because you can plant one thing one season, and then if the prices change, plant a different thing. And what we need to do is to be able to take the success we've had in agricultural production and make that long-term by creating more sustainable access to markets.
Two observations, if I may. One is, interestingly, one of the great consumers of Afghan poppy production is actually Iran. And there may be an opportunity there for cooperation. Secondly, you know, in my previous life up here on the Senate, in my portfolio was international narcotics control, and the observation I have in looking at many countries that are producers of various substances is that we have the disadvantage that many food crops or other kinds of agricultural production simply don't compete economically, unfortunately, with the drug of choice. or the precursor to that drug of choice. And that's what we're up against. I mean, how do you disincentivize a farmer who's poor and wants to feed his family from growing a cash crop that's highly lucrative and easily brought to market, you know, and we're offering them grow some food crops that are a fraction of the cash value of that crop. And I think that's got to be a dilemma, including in Afghanistan.
The gentleman's time's expired. Did anybody want to comment on that? If not, I would just comment myself, and then we're going to wrap this up, that one area that I think is has been a dismal failure is our ability to influence Afghanistan relative to poppy. Opium production in the world, 90% of it is coming from Afghanistan, and we're supposed to have some influence there and have spent billions and billions and billions of dollars, but to think that 90% of the world opium production comes from Afghanistan means that we haven't even scratched the surface in being successful on that front. But in any event, I would like to thank the panel for their testimony here this afternoon. We appreciate it greatly. Members will have 5 days to supplement their statements and remarks or offer additional questions. And if there's no further business to come before the committee, we're adjourned. Thank you.